Hey guys, Quincy Kane Morris here, and this is the first in what I hope will be a reoccurring series. I've been wanting to do a viewers comment series for a while, and I just would love to have an opportunity to engage with you guys, let you guys ask questions and not just answer them in the comments to you directly, but being able to share your questions and answer them for anyone else who might find value in them. So I thought this would be a cool series to start. So yeah, if you have a question that you'd like me to answer in a video, please leave a comment. I will check it out, and maybe I'll use it for the next episode. I don't know. So most of the comments I'm going to be looking at today come from one of my most popular videos, The Roles of Each Instrument. So a lot of these comments have to do with composing music and band arrangement and different instruments and software and all that kind of stuff. Just general musical production tips. So yeah, let's go ahead and dive right into it. Our first question comes from B Rad. Are drums a must? We have bass, guitar, and piano. Well, the great thing about music is that it's art, and art is just expressing yourself, which means there are no rules. You can do whatever you want. So just because you don't have a drummer doesn't mean that you're not allowed to make music. That's not true at all. You can, you could make a band out of whatever instrument lineup you have available to you. So, and that might even be kind of cool to do something that's different than what people typically hear in a band. Now with that said, if you would like to have that percussion and you just feel like, we need drums, I would like to have drums, but we just don't have a drummer, well, thankfully with recording software, there's a lot of things you can do with that. You can work with drum loops, which means in your recording software, there's these pre-made drum beats, and you can set them at different tempos, and you could come up with a drum arrangement, and then your band could play along with the drum arrangement. So, for a while, you could just use program drums as your drummer until you find someone who can actually play drums. Even for myself, I don't have a drummer. I program my own drum beats, and when I am performing live, like on my live streams, or even if I'm gigging, I've got pre-recorded backing tracks with the drum beats, so I'm just playing along with that. So thankfully, technology enables us to still perform as musicians, even if we are missing key components in our band. We have a comment here from Shadow Beneath the Crown. He says, cool man, everything helps, no matter how long one has been playing for. I thought that was a nice little comment, that it's true, like, no matter how long you've been playing for, there's always something new to learn. And so definitely don't get too prideful, no matter how good you get at your instrument, no matter how awesome your band is or your music production, always stay open-minded and be willing to learn new things, because you might learn, it might be just a small little nugget from, of information that somebody's sharing, and that might be enough to, give you a whole plethora of new ideas, or it might help you improve in an area that you've been struggling at or mediocre at for a long time. Just always keep an open mind and keep an eye out for, any kind of information that might help you improve at your craft. Our next question comes from Just for the Laughters. Hi, I'm a starter when it comes to composing, but I've learned the piano theory. It's why I need some advice. Example, I want to compose a song in the key of G. Do all the notes of my instruments need to start on G, or just on any random note from the scale of G? Thank you. So when it comes to composing, it is helpful to know what key you're playing in, because a key basically lets you know, all right, these are all the notes that should sound good together. These are the notes that should work well together. Now that's not to say that you can't use notes out of scale. In fact, I would encourage you, be experimental, try things out, see what you can discover. But as far as what you're trying to do, you didn't really specify what kind of music you were playing here, but just keep in mind that the lowest note is typically going to have the biggest influence on what chord is being played. So if the lowest note is a G, the listener is probably going to perceive that note as a G chord. So in a G chord, the notes that harmonize and build a G major chord would be G, B, and D. So you can pretty much use any arrangement of those notes, and depending on what kind of music you're doing, they can harmonize with that. Not every instrument has to play a G. It could play a note that harmonizes with that G, like a B or a D. But again, the lowest note has huge influence. So if, let's say if your bass is playing a G and you've got a piano and a guitar that are playing G chords, then it'll sound like a G. But if your guitar and your piano are playing G chords, but then the low end of the piano is playing a B, and the bass is also playing a B, then it'll sound like a mixed chord. It'll sound like a 1/3 chord, or like a G over a B chord. So you do have to be kind of mindful of that. However, vice versa, if the bass is playing G and then say the guitar was playing like octaves on a B or something like that, it would probably still sound like a G chord, and that B on top would just sound like something harmonizing with that G chord. The reality is, like, you can just kind of experiment, you know, there's a lot of different kind of chord combinations, and it's okay to use chords that are outside of a typical G chord, because sometimes you can just create some really interesting colors when you have a G chord, but then you have notes outside of that G chord, and that make it sound a bit more, you know, jazzy, or a bit, maybe it just kind of adds another emotional layer to it rather than just a standard major or minor chord. So hopefully that kind of gives you some ideas how you can play around with that. Another comment here from Bob Rushing. The way I think of bass and drum interaction is that the kick drum gives bass punch, and the bass gives the kick drum sustain, and when properly synchronized together, they create the foundation of the song which everything rides on top of. And I thought that was just a great explanation. Again, oftentimes the kick and the bass are best friends, and that's a really good way to think of it. The kick has the punch, so that's going to make the impact of the chord change or the rhythm, whatever it might be, but then the bass has the sustain, so after that initial punch, the note rings out. And this creates a really good foundation for everything else to sit on top of. So definitely keep that in mind when you are, whether you're a bassist or a drummer or you're composing your own music, really pay attention to how the bass and the drums interact with each other, because they can work together to create a really moving rhythm for the rest of the band to follow. Our next question comes from Solic Paradox. Now, they were asking about making another arrangement video. They said they'd been struggling with mixing for a long time, but they found that it was more so a problem with the arrangement, and that can definitely happen. When you're learning how to mix, how to produce music, a big part of mixing is starting off with a good arrangement to begin with. We had discussed this, and I think the problem was there was too much low mid-range content. So what I mean by that is frequencies are basically just different tones. You could have a grid here, and you could have your low end, and then gradually get up to higher sounds. So something kind of boomy like that, that's going to have more low end in it, and then that's a little more midi, so a little further up, and then that's really high, so that's getting up there, and then, you know, when you get to the high, like ding ding ding, that kind of stuff, that's way up in the higher frequencies. So what helps us perceive a full sound is when you have a little bit of each range. You've got a low range, and you've got some mid, you've got some highs, and they're all working together to create this big sound. If all you've got are lows and no highs, then it's just going to sound like a bunch of rumble. And so what you can do in your arrangement is by spreading the instruments along different octaves. So for example, I mean, think about it, the bass, that's taking care of the low end. The bass, that's the low end note. And so your guitar is going to sit on top of that by playing kind of mid-ranged chords. And there's two different chords. I mentioned this in the video. If you're playing acoustic guitar and you're playing these standard chords, you are playing from the low E to the high E string, so you're kind of getting mid-range and spreading out to some of that top end. If you're just playing a power chord like on the electric guitar, that's going to be more in the mid-range and probably not have a whole lot of high end to it. And then the cymbals from the drums, those are typically very high, so cymbals should be higher up, sitting nicely on top of everything. So if you're working with a lot of guitars, or guitar and piano, a lot of mid-ranged instruments, you don't want all of these instruments playing in the same range. So for example, if you are strumming a G chord on your guitar, on the piano by itself, it might sound good to hit your G chord kind of in the middle of the piano, but that's about the same range as where the guitar is playing. So those two, they're not going to complement each other very well. They're kind of just going to cover each other up. But if you take your piano chord and you move it up an octave, so you're playing your G chord up on the higher keys of the piano, then that's going to blend in a lot better with the guitar. Another thing to keep in mind, think of it as space. The higher up you go in frequencies, the more space there is to move around. Like if you've ever played a piano before, you can play some pretty crazy chords up on the high end, and you can still hear all the notes. But if you move down an octave, it might still sound okay, and if you move down another octave, suddenly the notes start becoming thicker, and they don't blend together as well. They start kind of muddying up, and then if you go down real low, it just sounds like a big mess. So that's kind of a good example there. Your low instruments, you need more space. You know, you can't put a bunch of stuff down there. But the high end, there's more room to layer up a lot of different notes, a lot of different instruments and things like that. Before you start mixing, make sure you've got a good arrangement. Make sure your band is playing along the full range of frequencies. If your rhythm guitar is playing mid stuff and you've got a lead guitar, you probably don't want to write your lead parts down in that same mid range. You probably want to play up higher on the neck or on the higher strings. That's going to sit on top of the rhythm part a lot better, and you're going to be able to hear both parts a lot more clearly. Got another comment here from Justin C. He says he's a bassist, and another tip he gives for other musicians is using the snare to shape your bass parts as well. And I thought that was a really great point. One thing that I like to do in my own songs is with the kick drum, I'll play the low note, but when the drums hit the snare, there's a couple things you can do. One, it sounds pretty cool to play the octave, so you could hit this low note, and then when, you know, low, and then when you hear the crack of the snare kind of go up an octave, that blends in really nicely. And again, that's sort of allowing the drums to shape the bass part so that they can both work together. Or you can just mute right at that snare. So you hold out the note, and then as soon as the snare hits, you mute the note, and that just creates a much tighter sound. Mainly because the bass, with it being a lower frequency, as that bass note is ringing out, when the snare comes, it doesn't come through as clearly while the bass is ringing out. So if you mute the note, that snare is really going to crack and really going to come through the mix nicely. Or if you move up an octave, again, it's not going to be so low, so it's going to play nicer with the snare, and you'll be able to hear both a little better. Plus, they'll both kind of accent each other and complement each other. So yeah, if you're a bassist, or if if you're arranging music with bass parts, think low notes for the kick drum and high notes for the snare drum. Question from Jacob here. He's saying, thank you very much for the video. Can you make more of this? Part 2 and 3 giving more examples. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do with this video series here. I feel like that original video kind of covered the basics of what you need to know. And yeah, I could maybe make another video with more examples, but it might be easier just to talk with you guys. If you have a question, just being able to answer that question directly and kind of giving you examples of what might work for your situation. So that's sort of what I'm trying to accomplish with this video series here. He was asking for sharing samples of the keyboards and other instruments in different ways that still sound awesome. And yeah, keyboards can do a lot with different kinds of electric piano and stuff, but the same general rules apply. Is whatever sound you're creating, you just want to think like, okay, do I have an instrument that's filling the role of the mid-range, and what instrument is that? And if so, then if I'm going to try to fit in another instrument, how do I complement that? Well, probably the best bet would be to go up on the high end and finding some high notes that can complement what that instrument is doing. Yeah, so if anyone has any questions related to the roles of each instrument, questions about how to arrange things better, to create more impact, or whatever it might be, questions just about typical song arrangement, let me know and I'll do my best to answer those in a future video. But chances are, if you leave a comment, I probably will reply to you in that comment, but I may still pick it for the video. If there's certain comments that you would like to share for actual videos, I'm thinking of starting some kind of Discord or subreddit where people can submit questions. So again, I'm kind of new to all this, so still figuring it out, but if I do get something like that set up, I'll be sure to pin a comment with a link so that you guys can check that out. But yeah, guys, thanks so much for watching. I appreciate all the kind words, the comments, questions, and stuff. I want to help you guys out, so if you have any more questions, please let me know. I'll do my best to answer them. Thanks for watching. Until next time.